Assalamualaikum. This podcast will cover Unit 2, Chapters 4 through 6. So Unit 2 is titled Making the Change, and then Chapter 4 specifically is titled Istiqamah. So the word Istiqamah linguistically means something that's stable, straight, disciplined, and consistent. So this is referring to how we should strive for our worship to be. So this can be one of the hardest tasks for us, and this is because as told in a hadith reported in Ahmed, the likeness of the heart is as the likeness of a feather that the wind is turning over in the desert, meaning that our hearts are very malleable and oftentimes very sensitive to change. So it can be very challenging to try to maintain our souls on the right path. And then another story that I thought was powerful was actually reported by Abdullah bin Masud, and when he said the example of the believer, unbeliever, and hypocrite is that of three people who arrive in a valley. So the one person descends and passes through to the other side. One of them descends and only reaches halfway, and then the other one doesn't even start to cross. So the one that remained at the first edge of the valley, called to the one in the middle and said, "Woe to you, where are you going?" The one in the middle, or the one on the other side, calls and says, "Come to the one who will save you." And the one in the middle calls back and says, "I don't want to die." So the man in the middle was looking back and forth, and then ultimately a flood came and he drowned. So this example is in this example, the one who made it all the way across is like the believer. The disbeliever is the one that didn't even start to cross and remained on the first side, and he ended up dying of starvation. And then the one in the middle is the person that's consistently torn, looking back and forth, and then finally he dies because he was unable to realize his full potential and failed to move at a gradual pace, as we are taught to do with istiqamah. However, the most praiseworthy tasks are those acts of worship that we're able to do consistently, even if they're small. So, Muhammad SAW told us in a hadith that the most pleasing acts to Allah are those which are done continuously, even in small. So it's important to keep this in mind as we continuously strive towards improving our worship, to do things and to be able to maintain them consistently. And then Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu used to say, "When the evening comes, don't wait for the morning, and when the morning comes, don't wait for the evening." So what he means by this is don't put things off when you can seize the day and kind of seize the moment and do as much worship as you can in the present, rather than continuously telling yourself that you'll do things tomorrow or the next day or the next day. It's better to do them now. Along with this, however, it's also important to keep in mind the concept of moderation, because our religion is known as a deen of moderation, and we're taught over and over and over again to not go to extremes, both in the Quran and in many ahadith. So Muhammad Islam told us to do good deeds properly and sincerely and moderately, to worship Allah in the forenoon and the afternoon, and always adopt a middle moderate regular course in order to reach our target. So he also advised us not to be of those people like that pray Qiyamul Layl or used to pray Qiyamul Layl and then left it. It's important to always be consistent in our actions. And then this also brings us to the concept of zuhud, which is roughly translated as asceticism. So this can be a really difficult concept to define, but perhaps Ali ibn Abi Talib defined it most effectively when he said that asceticism or zuhud is not that you own nothing, but that nothing owns you. So this means that it's okay. It's not necessarily haram or wrong to own nice things or to like to wear nice clothes, etc. But it's important that we don't let these I guess things of dunya overtake us and overcome our desires, and rather that we continuously keep in mind what our larger priorities in life are, and that we own them, but again, don't let them own us back. Okay, so this brings us to our next concept, which is the concept of wird. So wird, again, we'll start with definitions. So wird refers to your spiritual regimen, and linguistically it means knowing what's good for you and doing it voluntarily, whereas sharia is the path that leads to the water. So in class, Sheikh Omar Suleiman talked about the example of a camel owner. For example, he can bring the camel on the path to the water, but it can't force the camel to drink. However, the camel, knowing what's good for him or her, can choose to drink the water, and this is like the concept of wird. So in our case, we can be shown the path, but wird is when we voluntarily choose to worship or not worship because we know what's good for us. So in this chapter, we also talked about the purpose of all the pillars, and I just thought this was really useful to kind of review the purposes of why we do all of our actions. So first of all, the shahada is obviously to prevent us from committing the any act of shirk, as we declare that there's no Allah but Allah, and that there's no associated partners with Him. And then next is the pillar of salah. So this one is to help us curb our pride, and so in part because we devote 5 times a day toward the salah, and then secondly just because in the physical act of the worship we physically humble ourselves by kind of lowering our bodies and even touching our heads to the ground. And the next zakah, it can be used to cure our greed or miserliness as we donate our wealth towards those that are more needy, and can also kind of curb our desires for dunya as a result. And then siyam or fasting can curb our desires most obviously for food and drink and intimacy, but also can help us curb our desires and our tendencies towards anger or using our tongue for bad kinds of language, as we're also told to fast from these during Siyam as well. And then Hajj is perhaps the most all-encompassing of all the pillars, because during the rites of Hajj, we at one time or another kind of address all of these different aspects and try to curb all of these different shortcomings in ourselves. This brings us to understanding our complexity. So this concept is important to remember, that we are all, as human beings, are very unique. And what this means is that even as Muslims, some acts of worship might be easier for some people, while others might be easier for other people. So for example, for some people, it might be a lot easier to get into the habit of fasting on a regular basis, while for others it might be easier to, memorize Quran on a regular basis, and for others perhaps praying at long portions of the night might be something that they can more easily attain, and that's okay. So I think this verse from the Quran kind of points us out that there are many different qualities in human beings, and each of them can use their unique strengths to find Allah, and they will, inshallah, all will be given forgiveness and granted a great reward. So it's important to realize that there's not just one single non-negotiable path towards Allah, but there's many different avenues of worship through which we can achieve the similar ends. So the concept of the P90X word, so this is like, the P90X is a method of exercise when you use a lot of different muscles of your body. So similarly, the idea is that we sort of mix up our actions of worship in order that we don't get bored of them, or that they don't become kind of a mechanical thing for us. So there's a hadith in which Muhammad tells us that verily faith becomes worn out in your heart just the same way as a thobe becomes worn out. So it's important that we continuously renew our intentions, and sometimes it can be helpful to sort of mix up our actions of worship and try something new in order to keep us engaged and keep our intentions pure, I guess. So there's another hadith that's rather well known, in which the Prophet ﷺ tells us that people will be called to the gates of Jannah depending on their actions. So for example, those who used to offer their prayers will be called from the gates of prayer, and then those who used to participate in jihad will be called from the gates of jihad, and then those who observed fasts will be called from Ar-Rayyan, and those who gave charity will be called from the gates of charity, etc. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu heard this, and he said, "O Allah's Messenger, will there be anyone who will be called from all of these gates?" And Muhammad ﷺ responded to him and said, "Yes, and I hope you will be one of them." SubhanAllah, I just thought this was incredibly powerful because, well, we know that the gates of heaven are very far apart. So we're told that the distance between one gate and another is like the distance between the heavens and the earth. So it's an incredibly vast distance. And, practically speaking, it's hard to imagine even traversing the distance from one gate to another. And then furthermore, once you enter the gate of any gate of Jannah, once you're in, it's really hard to imagine ever wanting to come out. You'll probably want to stay there forever. So, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu probably realized all this too. And so it wasn't that he necessarily wanted to physically enter all of the different gates, but this question reflects his unique ambition in worship, and how he was always striving to be the very best he could possibly be and to excel in all of these different acts of worship. And I just thought that this was worth sharing to provide inspiration for us as something that we could all as well strive towards.